Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Gallego.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Willis, Arizona experienced significant population growth in recent years, which, as you know, brings unique housing challenges. Despite being the 5th largest city in the U.S., Phoenix receives about 7,400 vouchers, far fewer than Philadelphia, the 6th largest city, which receives over 22,000 vouchers. This is why I introduced the Housing Voucher Fairness Act to allocate additional housing choice vouchers in our fastest growing cities, which assist families in affordable rental housing. Can you talk about the unique challenges that fast-growing cities face and solutions that you have seen actually work?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the Housing Choice Voucher, the Housing Voucher Fairness Act. So we're happy to look into this issue, but I think it raises some significant issues because right now only 1 out of 4 eligible households that for housing assistance really gets any help. The others have to essentially fend for themselves, and that's 3 out of 4. And Congress certainly should be working to ensure that rental assistance is available universally to all eligible households.
Well, thank you. And one of the things that we discovered, the reason why there is a disparity is that the housing voucher allocation is based off the 2000 census. So if you're fast-growing cities like Houston, Dallas, Las Vegas, you're actually going to be disproportionately penalized for having good policies and growing versus some of these older cities that are essentially atrophying, but yet we're being punished. So even an update just on using the most recent census would actually be more accurate. And I hope that we'll be working on that legislation too. And I hope my colleagues will help join us there.
Sure. And if I can just add to that too, and I think it is important you mentioned data, in terms of the data that HUD collects, because we certainly do, again, going back to wanting to protect those programs and the staff at HUD, because 76% in the office in HUD is being threatened to cut that's the staff there. And it is important to have that data to understand the housing issue and how we can correct it.
Right. And one of the things, since we were talking about cuts, Arizona's unique, one of the unique states where we have 22 federally recognized tribes. We have the largest tribal enrollment in the country, lots of land, but of course we have a housing challenge. So the firing, obviously, of and closing down of some of our tribal Bureau of Indian Affairs offices makes things difficult, especially when we're trying to apply for housing grants for some of these tribal nations. So I'm going to introduce to the record a letter that myself and Senator Kelly wrote about our opposition to the closing of these offices, which again will exacerbate a housing crisis that's actually on. People don't understand. We actually have on tribal lands, even a housing crisis even there. I have another question, Mr. Glasser, and this is something that I've noticed, is that many Californians are moving to Arizona, and instead of downsizing their homes, right, they're selling a pretty valuable property for $1.5 million in California, and then they're just coming to Arizona, and they're buying nearly that amount. Why are they doing that? And explain the tax implication of why they're doing that.
Well, I think it's the. Thank you, Senator, for that question. I think the appeal of Arizona should be obvious to anyone.
Great! I can go on and on.
And certainly,
but the reason they're selling their house at $1.2 million, and it's a paid-off house, and instead of going and getting this retired couple, a man and a woman, partner, whatever it is. Instead of going and getting a nice house, a condo, and pocketing the rest of the money, they're not doing that. They're buying a house almost of equivalent value. What is the reasoning for that? It's not a trick question. I could answer that.
No. Well, the first order thing is you go to a place where housing is cheaper, you buy more house. Right. We believe as economists that people respond to prices, and if housing is cheaper, you wouldn't be surprised if they spent $1.8 million on the house because they could get so much more house for their buck. Right. In Arizona than in California.
All right. Well, the reason also is because if that family sells that house and they don't buy a house of equivalent or close to equivalent value, they're going to end up paying capital gains on that house. So a retired couple, instead of trying to just pay the government the money, which I actually agree with them, they shouldn't pay that. We should figure out a way to actually give them a capital gains tax cut, because what actually ends up happening is that then they would come to Arizona, buy a smaller place, and then they could keep that money, that capital gains, for their own retirement. Instead, what they're doing is they're buying an equivalent house that at least keeps some value. And so one of the things I'd love to think about is like, how are we, basically incentivizing these well-to-do retirees into buying houses that they don't necessarily need to buy, because that's the only thing that actually brings them some level of economic value and stability. So with that, I apologize, Mr. Chair, because I complained about going over time, and I yield back my time.
Sounds like an opportunity for us to work together. The TCJA is relates to increasing the